Live from the Jorgensen Center for the Performing Arts at the University of Connecticut, an Eyewitness News special, the Campaign 2018 Gubernatorial Debate.
Good evening and welcome to the WFSB TV Gubernatorial Debate here at UConn. I am your moderator, Dennis House. It's going to be a great evening. I invite you to stay tuned and learn a lot about your potential governor. During the next hour, we will ask several candidates. We'll ask several questions of the candidates for governor. We ask that you, the audience, hold off on applause until the end of the program and be respectful at all times. The panelists tonight are Emily Munson of Hearst Media, which includes the Connecticut Post, and Chris Hanna of the Daily Campus, which is the newspaper here at UConn. Let's meet the candidates. Ned Lamont is the Democrat, Bob Stefanowski is the Republican, and Oz Griebel is unaffiliated. Gentlemen, thank you for being with us tonight.
Thank you, Dennis. Pleasure to be here.
Here are the rules. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer the question, and the first person to get the question will then have 1 minute to rebut. At the end of that session, we will have rapid-fire questions requiring one word or short answers. We will close the debate with a 1 minute closing statement from each candidate. Now, we picked names out of a hat to see who went first, and Mr. Griebel was the winner here. Mr. Griebel, you've all talked at length about your plans to revitalize Connecticut, but you've really all avoided specifics about the very first problem you will face if elected. That is an estimated $4.6 billion budget deficit. Right. Explain to us in detail the first steps you'll take in your first 100 days in office to try to put the state on track to reduce that deficit. Will you raise taxes, eliminate state jobs, call for tolls, eliminate services, hold departments? Please be specific. You have 2 minutes.
I'll be as specific as I can, Dennis. We put out Connecticut. We're all in this together in a plan. There are specifics in there. And when you're looking at a $4.5 billion operating deficit, the first thing a governor has to do is make sure we do minimal damage to this state. And what I mean by that, we've had 4 or 5 straight budget cycles of cuts to municipal aid. We've had cuts to agencies that support the most vulnerable around us. So when we're looking at the cuts that may come in the budget, it has to be around doing the limited amount of damage. So we've talked about making sure we take the maximum amount of the rainy day fund, particularly into the first year, to ease that $4.6 billion operating deficit. We've talked about looking at potentially not contributing to the state employee or teacher retirement fund for 2 years to give us some breathing room and put some specific examples of how we can shore those 2 pension funds up that are right now at about 30% of actuarial value. And the other point I would make, Dennis, you can't just look at this in the context of this year's budget. You're also looking out at average projected deficits, for whatever all that's worth, of $2.5 to $3 billion each year. So the notion of getting some structural change in place and having discussions around things like regional delivery of municipal services, starting to lay the groundwork to bring state unions, when they come back in 2020, to talk about base compensation and work rules, bring the CBAC agreement in as part of that discussion. Those have to be part not only of the $4.6 billion operating deficit to address that, but also looking out. As far as the last thing any of us want to do is cut taxes. We've talked about eliminating the business entity tax, which every entity pays about $250 a year. Do I think we could do that? Do I think we could eliminate the estate tax and bring it down to zero? Yes. The personal income tax is the workhorse of this budget, and that has to stay in place in order to make sure that we do minimum damage to this state as we go forward.
Mr. Griebel, thank you. Mr. Stefanowski, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Dennis. So you're going to hear a couple perspectives tonight. One is more of the same, higher taxes, more government spending. It's what Ned Lamont's been saying for months. And my first week in office is going to be a change. This state is on an absolute fiscal cliff. We're going to call a fiscal state of emergency. An emergency not because a hurricane's coming or a tornado, but an economic crisis that our state faces. The spending in Connecticut is out of control, and we have to rein it in. Look at the bonding that Dan Malloy did 2 weeks ago. We're spending money like we don't have it. We are paying for buses from New Britain to Hartford that cost $1,000 per inch. We are buying properties in the city of Orange for $5 million that are worth $500,000 because a Democratic donor asked us to do it. The spending in this state is absolutely out of control. I'm going to rein it in. We're going to use those cuts in spending to lower taxes over time. That's going to stimulate our economy. That's going to bring jobs back. That's going to bring people back. We need to do the exact opposite of what Dan Malloy has been doing for 8 years. And trust me, ladies and gentlemen, We need to do it quickly, and I am going to do it quickly. The status quo has to end. It's time to make some tough decisions. It's time to make government smaller and more responsive. It's time to put more money back in the hard-working people of Connecticut's pockets so we can invest in education, we can invest in infrastructure, we can invest in health care, and the best way to do that is by lowering taxes and getting a vibrant economy going again in Connecticut. That's exactly what we're going to do when I'm in office. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stefanowski. Mr. Lamont, you have 2 minutes to respond.
Well, first of all, Bob, it's good to see you again. And Oz, it's great to have you up here on the stage. And everybody from UConn. For me, it's great to be back. I was first here 30 years ago when I was, my company was building the telecommunications system for the UConn. I was stopped by the Student Center today, and people were still pretty happy, but they're ready for a 5G upgrade, President Herbst. Let's think about that. Your question, let's get back to it. You asked for some specifics, not a lot of platitudes.
First
what do
100
we
days.
do? First thing off, look, we don't need an emergency session. You need somebody who's going to have a budget ready to go within 4 months of today. You can't say zero-based budgeting, blank piece of paper. You want somebody with specifics. I'll give you some specifics. Number one, I'd be the first governor in generations who started a business and actually created jobs, working hand in glove with the business community, making sure we train people for the jobs we've got out there right now. Not more taxes, but more taxpayers. That's how you get this state going again. That's how you get this state growing again. Specifically in terms of spending, let's go where the big ticket items are. You know, Bob keeps talking about nickels. We have a deficit in the billions, a $2.5 billion deficit in year one. If I get that fixed in year one, we don't have to replicate that in year two. And as Oz said, first of all, do no harm. Don't start by a $10, $11 billion tax cut for millionaires, so you have to shove that in and try and fix this. What I heard from the Fiscal Commission is I want fiscal stability. I want an honestly balanced budget from day one, something with certitude, something that takes off the risk and uncertainty from the table. You'll hear me tonight talk about three main buckets of spending cuts. A, healthcare, where 25% of our spending is. B, the structural reforms we need to equalize out our pension problems. And number three, shared services for our towns and municipalities. That's how we bring down the cost of spending without taxes.
Thank you, Mr. Lamont. Mr. Griebel, you have 1 minute for rebuttal.
Appreciate it. Monty Frank and I are running as independents because only an independent governor can bring both parties together along with the private sector to address these very serious fiscal issues and to promote the very strong asset base that we have here in Connecticut. I know many of you in this audience are under 30 years of age, but under two Republican governors and a Democratic governor and under changes in the legislature, we've had no net job growth in this state. We've had increased more taxes and fees, we've had higher rates, and we've had an out-migration of people at all ages and all income levels. Only an independent governor and a lieutenant governor can bring both parties together to work together in a collaborative way, unlike just staying in the Republican-Democratic silos and having fights. This campaign and our message is giving you a choice on November 6th to take Connecticut back from the two-party system and focus on Connecticut taxpayers, Connecticut residents, and Connecticut employers.
Thank you, Mr. Griebel. Mr. Stefanowski, this next question goes to you. Governor Malloy has said his toughest day ever as governor of Connecticut was the day of the Sandy Hook massacre. Governor Rowland had to lead the state after 9/11. You, too, will face unpredictable challenges like storms or perhaps a catastrophic bridge collapse that Governor O'Neill dealt with in the 1980s. What experience in your life has prepared you emotionally and intellectually to lead all of the people of Connecticut during an unexpected crisis?
It's a great question, Dennis. Thank you. I think everyone in the audience and on TV needs to evaluate every candidate up here. Whoever the next governor is stepping into an extraordinarily difficult situation. You have to look at the leadership of the people on the stage. You have to look at the temperament. You have to look at the tenacity. Are you going to have somebody in the corner office up in Hartford that has the toughness, the integrity, and the discipline to deal with things quickly and honestly? 30-year career in the corporate sector, I've seen my shares of high and lows. I've got 3 daughters and a wife. I've seen highs and lows in my family. But I think what this state needs is it needs honesty. It needs someone who's going to address our problems. It does not need another politician who's going to pander for the next vote. We've seen that for 8 years. And again, the way to get everybody to feel better about this state of Connecticut is to get this economy moving. We can get through a lot of things, but if we don't get this economy moving, there's not going to be anybody left in this state, ladies and gentlemen.
If I may interrupt, though, back to the question, what has prepared you in your life to lead Connecticut?
I've had to have tough discussions with employees. I've had personal situations that I've had to deal with. I think every family faces tragedies, Dennis. And when you've got 10,000 people working for you across 35 different countries in Europe, you get a sense of the different issues that people face. You have to sit through the detail, you have to treat people fairly, and you have to be aggressive. And those qualities work in the corporate sector, they work in leadership, and they're going to work no matter what the state of Connecticut faces. We're going to deal with it honestly, we're going to hit it up front, and we're going to take it on.
Mr. Lamont, you have 2 minutes to respond.
There's another quality you need in a governor, and that's empathy. You have to understand people and where they're coming from. I was at Sandy Hook probably a month ago, and meeting with a lot of those kids now 6 years later, and they were having a reunion, if you will, with folks from Parkland who had come up, who had also suffered incredible gun tragedy. And just being with those kids, talking to those kids, listening to those kids, and seeing what a difference it made in their lives. Now, one case 6 years later, many months later for the Parkland folks, them being able to compare stories, see what a scar that left. It reminds you every day what you have to do as a governor, which is listen to people, look people in the eyes, and understand the pain they're going through. I understand that we're in a state where the middle class is getting slammed right now. And I see the pain in people's eyes. Everywhere I go, I hear about health care. I hear about what's going to happen if they take away protections for people with pre-existing conditions. You look people in the eyes. You look at that mom whose child has a son with autism or a husband who's diabetic, wondering whether they will have health care as well. And if you're going to get through these incredibly tough situations, you can be tough, you can be hard, you can make the tough decisions, but you also have to show respect, and you're going to have to listen. And I'm going to show respect, and I'm going to listen. I'm going to listen to the folks from labor who's going to have to come to the table. I know the small business people and how scared they are. They're not going to have a budget on time that they can count upon. I'm going to work with Republicans and Democrats. I'm going to look people in the eye and tell them I'm going to have a fair solution, a tough solution, an honest solution, so at the end of year one, we have an honestly balanced budget. And every day, I'm going to remember the pain that people are going through, listening to their heartache, and remembering what I can learn from them.
Mr. Lamont, thank you. Mr. Griebel, 2 minutes.
Dennis, thank you. Your first question had to deal with the budget, and one of the things that scares me a great deal is looking down the road at a possible downturn in our economy. We've had no correction in 10 years. So when you put about the unexpected question, one of the things that's concerning to me is what happens if we get a downturn along the lines that we had in the dot-com bust and again in 07, 08. Monty Frank and I have not only lived and worked in this state, we have worked for this state of Connecticut for the past 25 years. Monty has worked significantly on legislation to reduce gun violence. He's dealt with issues of veterans' homelessness. He's dealt with the opioid crisis as immediate past president of the Connecticut Bar Association. I spent 25 years here in the state working for a bank and for the Metro Hartford Alliance, all working to bring people together for a better economic climate to grow 200,000 jobs. This is a growth challenge we have in front of us. No net job growth in 30 years means we have had to raise taxes. We haven't had more people paying taxes. So what Monty and I built is, I think, is incredibly important to the unexpected, is the network of people we've met professionally and personally on a number of key issues. People we've built reputations for candor, for integrity, for creativity, for inclusion. Those are elements that are critical when you cannot possibly anticipate what's coming over the transom, whether it be economic or in the case of a tragedy along the lines of Sandy Hook. And so what Monty and I bring to the table or a set of relationships, a set of experiences, an understanding of the state for 25 years, not flitting in and out, but being here for 25 years and building those relationships and building an understanding of what the strengths of the state are that you'll need to leverage in the event of an unanticipated crisis. So we look forward not only to leading during the regular times, the normal times, but we are prepared as two people who are working together to be ready for that unexpected event.
Mr. Stefanowski, you have 1 minute.
It's been interesting to watch my daughters throughout this process, 24, 19, and 15. And I got to be honest with you, they didn't really want me to run for governor. For my 15-year-old, may have been her worst nightmare. But you talk about empathy. They've seen what's been going on throughout this state. They've seen what this economy has done to people, as have I. They see people struggling every day in and outside of the inner city. And they are so on board right now. And you know why they're on board? Because they look at me and they say, Dad, you can fix it. They said, you have a heart, Dad, that you can understand it. You yourself, Dad, grew up in New Haven and have a blue-collar beginning. But you also have the integrity and the strength to tell the truth. And the truth is, we have to get this economy moving. The truth is not more taxes and more handouts. The truth is, let's get this economy moving. Let's start to build this state back from the bottom up, and let's get Connecticut back to what it used to be. That's the best way to help the people through our state.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Emily Munson, and it's directed toward Mr. Lamont.
All right, Mr. Lamont, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, 6.3% of commuters in Fairfield County spend at least 90 minutes getting to and from work every day. The national average is 2.8%. Time sitting in traffic translates to lost economic productivity and perhaps businesses and individuals leaving the state. So as governor, what would you do to reduce congestion and improve Connecticut's roadways? And would you support a lockbox for transportation?
Excellent question, Emily. And we heard a lot about the truth. We're inheriting a $2.5 billion deficit next year. Bob's plan would add another $11 billion by eliminating a tax that's income tax that predominantly helps millionaires. You're going to need a governor who tells you the truth about some of the tough things we got to do. You got to be able to say transportation is key to the economic future of the state of Connecticut. When GE left, we said, what can we learn from this? We got together. You know, they left for Massachusetts. They left for not a low-tax state. They left for a state that they thought gave them better opportunities, more tech talent that they can lean from, and a transportation system they worked. They told us one of the reasons they left was the problem with our transportation gridlock. Even if they could find the next generation of talent, they couldn't get to the office. I'm going to focus on fixing our transportation system, something Oz has worked on for many years as well, I've got to say. And what that means is, look, we're going to have to pay to upgrade our roads and bridges. We're going to have to do everything we can for more frequent rail service. I'm going to do everything I can to get those big tractor-trailer trucks leased off the road during prime time. And I'm going to pay for it. I'm going to pay for it by telling you the truth. I can't do it by raising the gas tax. The gas tax is disappearing as a source of revenue. Bob's going to make some stuff up, but I've been very clear. We're going to put an electronic toll on big tractor-trailer trucks coming in and out of the state of Connecticut. That's $100 million. That's $100 million we can go to fix the roads and bridges. Andy and I live in a town where we went over the Minas River Bridge the day it collapsed. I was up in Pomfret the other day, another bridge went down. We're going to have to do everything we can to get this state moving again. I'm going to pay for it in an honest way going forward, and I guarantee you we're going to have a system that works again.
Mr. Lamont, thank you. Mr. Griebel, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Dennis. Thanks for the question. I chaired the Transportation Strategy Board from 2001 to 2005. It was created under Governor Rowland. Neither Governor Rowland nor Governor Rowe wanted anything to do with the report that came out of it, and Governor Malloy abolished it. The first thing we will do on day one is to reestablish the Transportation Strategy Board, and it epitomizes the way we will work with the private sector. The way that board was set up, you had 5 major commissioners, DOT et al., and 10 people for the private sector who were appointed by the legislature from around the state. The beauty of that was you had the private sector helping to identify what the priorities of spending are. And the issue here to me isn't about taxes, as important as they are. What angers people in this state is how we spend the money. So yes, am I in favor of the lockbox that's on the ballot on November 6th? Absolutely. It will at least give the governor a club to make sure that the gasoline tax and electronic tolls are secured for transportation investment. Electronic tolls have to be part of the long-term solution and not just on trucks. One of our ideas, knowing it's going to take 3 or 4 years to get federal approval on that, is we would put a pilot in on the HOV lanes on I-91 and I-84 to demonstrate that the world's not going to come to an end when electronic tolls go in, and have the opportunity opportunity to experiment with congestion pricing. When the tolls go in on the 95s, 91s, and 84, part of this congestion issue is going to have to be dealt with in congestion pricing. Nobody likes it, but that's the reality that we have to deal with. Work with employers to see, does everybody have to go in at 7 in the morning? Can everybody have to leave at 4 in the afternoon? All that has to come together. And then we've got to get creative. One of the ideas that came out of that Transportation Strategy Board was moving the containers that come into the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey by barge to New Haven, New London, and Bridgeport, and take advantage of the interior rail system. It doesn't add capacity in terms of lanes, but it starts to take some of the trucks off the road who don't want to be down in Port Authority of New York or New Jersey either. The beauty of the private sector is it's got the creativity, the tenacity, and the ability to set the priorities on how transportation dollars are spent.
Thank you, Mr. Griebel. Mr. Stefanowski, 2 minutes.
You know, Ned says he's been clear. 4 weeks ago, Ned was on WPLR radio, so he was going to put up tolls and increase taxes. 2 weeks ago, Ned said, well, I'm not going to increase taxes. I'm going to lower the property tax by $100. 2 weeks ago, it was, I'm going to lower property taxes by $300. Make no mistake about it, ladies and gentlemen, if Ned Lamont becomes governor, there are going to be tolls every mile on I-95. Think about it for a minute. Are you going to go through all the problem to build the technology, get it through the legislature, get all the approval, and just tax heavy-duty out-of-state trucks in the evening? Of course not. You're going to have 80 tolls on I-95, you're going to have tolls on I-84, and you know what it is? It's yet another tax on the hard-working people of Connecticut. We can put it in a lockbox, you can call it whatever you want, but when they need it, they rate it out of the general fund and they use it for whatever they want. Ladies and gentlemen, enough is enough. How many taxes are we going to put on people? We have 300 taxes and fees on the people in Connecticut. And the answer is, let's just add one more and suddenly we'll get a different answer. Ned Lamont will be Dan Malloy version 2.0. You're going to have taxes coming out of your ears. How long are we going to put up with 8 years of destructive economic policy? It's time for a change. Yes, it is time to be honest. We've got a crisis in this state, and you know why we have a crisis? Because we're taxing people to the point where they're leaving at 80 per day. And unless we turn that around, and unless we show some leadership, and unless we do a 180-degree turn on the economic policy from the last 8 years, we're not going to get it done. I'm going to do it. We're going to do it together. We're going to get it done quickly, and we're going to turn around the state of Connecticut.
Mr. Stefanowski, thank you. Mr. Lamont, you have a 1-minute rebuttal.
Bob is just making it up. He's just making it up. If he had a plan of his own, he had a strategy, he had a way he could cut spending, if he had a plan to get this state moving again, if he had a way to create jobs, he'd be talking about his plan and his ideas rather than constantly attacking me. And that's just no way to get this state moving. That's no way to get people together, no way to make this happen. Look, I'm going to be tough as nails when it comes to what we got to do on the spending side. I will prioritize what we've got to do. But the question was about transportation. Let's get back actually to the question. You know, we just opened up a rail line from New Haven up to Springfield. It takes about 2,000 cars a day off the road. 2,000 people taking this. These are the type of investments we need to get this state moving again. Ask us for some specific ideas on how you get this job going again, how we get this state moving again, and please dismiss all the cheap attacks.
Mr. Lamont, thank you. Our next question is directed toward Mr. Griebel.
Thank you for remembering my name, Dennis.
And it's from Christopher.
Mr. Griebel, in the audience tonight are UConn students,
yes,
many of whom will prepare to enter the workforce when
Correct.
they graduate in the spring. Like many millennials, they will be seeking job and social opportunities in cosmopolitan cities. So what 3 things will you do to improve Connecticut so these Huskies and other millennials across the state will want to stay in Connecticut?
2 things. One is this is a growth challenge. No net job growth in 30 years, as I said in the answer to the first question, puts us in this problem. The biggest challenge we're facing in Connecticut right now is a crisis of confidence. A crisis of confidence in residents and a crisis of confidence in employers. So one of the things we'll do is make sure that acting as the chief marketing officer, we're talking to the employers who are here today to make sure that the jobs they have here stay here. That we convince them that we're able to get rid of some of the low-hanging fruit and eliminating regulations and mandates to make it more job-friendly and more growth-friendly. We'll talk about partnering up with higher education, our vocational schools, more closely with the employers. So just give you a quick example, over an electric boat, they're hiring 15 to 16,000 engineers here over the next couple of years with a submarine contract. Westerly, the community college in Westerly, Rhode Island, is referred to as EB University because they've taken their curriculum and married that more closely with what EB wants. Most of you in this room are pursuing a traditional undergraduate degree, which is great. That's where you want to be. We need to make sure that our insurance companies, our health employers here, hospitals, and those who provide health care across the board, that our R&D capacity in places like Jackson Labs and at UConn, at Yale, are growing, that this is a place where those jobs are going to be. The goal of getting 200,000 more jobs in this state is to give us the revenue to invest in education, invest in transportation, and restore Connecticut to its preeminence on a national level where it's been for most of its history. And the way we're going to do that is through jobs and keeping people like you here. You are the future of Connecticut. Your votes matter in many ways more today than they ever have before, because you're going to own the vote, the result of that vote, in a way that those of us who are older won't. So the partnership and the commitment to younger people here is absolutely critical.
Mr. Stefanowski, 2 minutes.
Yeah, so I graduated from a school down the road, Fairfield University, in 1984. I was working at Hartford in the Gold Building with Price Waterhouse within 90 days. I met my wife, Amy, there. We bought a house. We took out a mortgage. We raised a family. We had a terrific life and career in the state of Connecticut. Dan Malloy and his economic policies have ruined that. Connecticut is the only state in the entire nation that has not recovered the jobs from the Great Recession. And you know why? I'm going to sound like a broken record, ladies and gentlemen, but fundamentally flawed economic policies. How do you attract business and jobs to a state where your corporate tax rate is higher than your neighbors, where your roads and bridges are the fourth worst in the nation? We need to get this economy moving. We need to have housing prices start to turn around. The last debate was at the realtors. Housing prices in Fairfield County are down 17%. It starts with the economy, and we can't continue to do more of the same. We need to have vibrant cities. I can remember going out in 1984, the Hartford Whalers. You probably don't remember them. They had the best logo in the entire NHL, a whale. I still have the shirt. It's older than my kids. You could go out at night, you could go to a Whalers game, you could go to restaurants, and you know what did that? Economic development. Low taxes, people wanted to be here. Good roads and bridges. The best thing we can do for the young people of Connecticut is get this economy moving, allow you to invest in a home if you want to. Many kids today don't want a home, that's fine, but start to appreciate some value in a home, have a great investment, have vibrant cities, have a job, and have some hope for the future. People in Connecticut right now are losing hope. His economic policy is going to continue it. We need a change. We need a change to bring hope back to the young people of Connecticut. I'm going to deliver it. Ned Lamont is not.
Thank you, Mr. Stefanowski. Mr. Lamont, you have 2 minutes.
Chris, thank you for that question. That's the question I heard from everybody at the Student Center. And when Annie and I moved to Connecticut 35 years ago, we knew we had hit the jackpot. We knew this was an amazing state, a great quality of life, good job opportunities, cities that were sort of funky, and values that we respected of independence and integrity and the self-reliance and working together. And Connecticut still has that, but we've been let down, as Oz would say, by a generation of political leaders on both sides of the aisle. You know, I can say that Bob's got the exact same tax scheme as John Rowland, and where did that get us? But why have the debate about where we've been? The question is, what are we going to do going forward? And I think the first thing I learned is we're going to have to get this state moving again. We're going to have to make this a place where our kids want to be. And you can't do that by cutting $12 billion out of the budget. You can't do that by gutting education, gutting K through 12. These are the reasons we want to stay in Connecticut. This is the reasons why we want to raise our family in Connecticut. You can cut taxes for the millionaires. You know what that would mean? That just means pushing all those expenses down onto our towns and cities. That means pushing the expenses on to folks like you. You'll see that reflected in your tuition. You'll see that reflected in the cost of education. You'll see that at CCSU, not just UConn, CCSU, where I'm a teacher. You'll see that reflected in terms of property tax, the property tax that your family is paying right now. That's the biggest tax paid by the middle class. That's the tax that I'm going to cut. That's the tax that lets young people stay in the state. And I'd be the first guy who started a business in the state. I'll be working every day, hand in glove, with small business and big business, making sure that all the skills that each of you have learned in UConn and these other places are matched up with the jobs we have going begging right now. These are great jobs. They're going to be for Connecticut families, each and every one of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lamont. Mr. Gribble, you have 1 minute of rebuttal.
Two things. Thanks, Dennis. One is I think what university did under President Herbst's leadership of moving the West Hartford campus to downtown Hartford is an example of partnering up tighter. The expansion of the Stanford campus, putting you closer to prospective employers is a great idea. And the other thing that governor has to do in being the chief marketing officer is making sure that employers know how much talent is in this state now. The GE move allegedly to go up because they wanted digital talent and they had to go to Boston or Atlanta. I don't believe we did a good enough job in explaining to them the talent that exists here in Connecticut, at UConn and at Yale and at the other schools. Part of this is making sure we close the gap between people working in the silos on the employer side and people in higher education and the education side. Closing that gap, bringing people together is what the Griebel-Frank administration will be all about.
Thank you, gentlemen. Our next question goes to Mr. Stefanowski and comes from Emily.
Mr. Stefanowski, on his first day as governor in 2011, Daniel Malloy issued an executive order requiring the adoption of generally accepted accounting principles. What would be your first executive order if elected?
Well, I'm a CPA and I love GAAP, but I'm not sure that would be my top priority my first day in office. But I do have to, and I'll answer that, I do have to comment on something Ned said. He said we can't focus on where we've been. You know the problem, ladies and gentlemen, we've been going like this. And Ned Lamont's economic policy is going to continue us in the exact same direction because it is no different whatsoever than where we've been. That's exactly the problem. We can't keep going the way we've been going. That's why I keep focusing on it. His economic policy is identical to Dan Malloy. I don't know if he asked for GAAP or not, but absent that, his economic policy is identical. That's why we need change. And I got to believe, I'll talk about GAAP just for a second, I'm sure it's infinitely worse in Hartford than we even know because we're not on that basis. But again, what am I going to focus on? The economy, taxes, regulation, getting the economy moving. We lost, during Dan Malloy's administration, the state of Connecticut grew a lot slower than the national economy. Had we grown at the same level, just the same level as the national economy, we would have had 30 billion more of gross annual product. That would have delivered another $12 billion of taxes.
What would your first executive order be, though?
A state of emergency, as I said before, a state of emergency. We'll deal with Hartford. We'll deal with a lot of other crazy spending, Dennis. We'll get taxes down. We'll get this economy moving. My executive order is to reverse exactly what Dan Malloy's been doing for the last 8 years. And he's going to continue it. Economy, taxes, money in people's pockets, invest in education. That's what we're going to move forward with.
Mr. Lamont, you have 2 minutes. What would your first executive order be?
Let me just respond for a second. Two of us here on this stage actually took on Dan Malloy in 2010. Two of us thought that we had to make the structural changes we needed to get this state moving again. Two of us wanted to make fundamental changes in terms of where we are. That was Oz and myself. Bob wasn't there. I don't know where Bob was. He didn't bother to vote. 2010, 2014. I stood up and I challenged. And by the way, I've stood up to my party before. I had another race some years earlier where I thought we were wrong in the war in Iraq. I stood up and challenged my own party. Frankly, this is sort of a unique opportunity for me. I've only run against Democrats. This time I have a chance to run against not one, but two Republicans. You know, Oz is sort of a traditional Connecticut Republican, and Bob is more of a Trump Republican. And I'm ready to go in there and take on anybody and stand up and challenge the way we've been doing business every day.
Hold your applause till later. Please hold your applause till later.
I don't have executive orders. I'll tell you the first thing I would do, Dennis. I would say, all right, here we go. Labor, let's come into the room. Business, I need you at the table as well. You know, there's an ad out by Bob that says, Ned's saying everybody's going to have to do a little bit more. You're right. Everybody's going to have to do a little bit more. Labor's going to be at the table. Business is going to be at the table. Republicans and Democrats, small towns, we're going to have to learn the shared services. I'm going to get these folks together. I have to put together a budget within 4 months. I have to make sure it's an honest budget. And it's not going to be a $4.5 billion deficit if I get it solved in that year one. That was the biggest mistake Dan Malloy made. He didn't get that solved in year one. Gap or no gap, you've got to solve it. You've got to deal with the structural crisis we have. You need somebody who can work with respect with labor and business. That would be my job one.
Mr. Lamont, thank you. Mr. Griebel, 2 minutes.
So two things. One, just for the audience. Ned is running against a Republican and an independent candidate for governor. Let me be really sure.
Please hold your applause.
There's one Republican up here, not two. The second thing, the question, you've got to start this process, Dennis, on November 7th. So the executive order, the idea of putting a transition team together, getting the best and brightest starts on November 7th. We're campaigning today to win on November 6th. The campaign to change Connecticut along the lines we're talking about here starts on November 7th. I'll give you a couple of quick executive orders. I would reestablish a Transportation Strategy Board right away. I would start the process of going to the federal government to get the authority we need to get the tolls in. I would go to the Highway Department to see if we could put that idea of putting tolls on the HOV lanes. I would focus on transportation right away. Instead of yapping about it, let's get something moving in that direction. That's where we want to go. And I want to come back to the transportation thing in one area. On the pay me now, pay me later issue, we took in 1999 under Governor Rowland, we took 15 cents out of the gasoline tax. At that time, each penny represented $15 million. 15 times 15 is 225 million. Times 20 years is $5 billion. Nobody likes the gasoline tax. But we're now in a situation where we underfunded our transportation infrastructure, where we're having these asinine fights where Republicans can't support a toll and the Democrat has to be supported regardless. This notion is not about tolls or costs. It's making sure that you understand that the dollars you pay in the gasoline tax or tolls or your income tax are going into the services that you want. That's what this issue is about. So yes, do I believe we need to invest in transportation? Absolutely. And that would be one example of some of the executive orders I would start with.
Thank you, Mr. Griebel. Mrs. Stefanowski, you have 1 minute of rebuttal.
So, Ned's going to try to hide behind Oz all night. And just for one clarification, I have the endorsement of the Independent Party of Connecticut, as well as the Republican Party. But listen to what Ned just said. He said on tape, everyone's going to have to do a little bit more. What does that sound like to you? Everyone's going to be taxed more. Because he followed it up in that interview by saying that. He said it on radio. He said it on TV. Make no mistake about it. He is going to raise taxes on everyone in this state. And we need to do the exact opposite. I don't understand how you can say something 4 weeks ago and have a totally different position 4 weeks later. But ladies and gentlemen, I don't even worry about it anymore because I know the economic policy of Ned Lamont is going to be exactly what Dan Malloy did. We need to turn it around. The people of Connecticut are sick and tired of taxes. We don't need tolls. We can get rid of the state income tax over 8 years. We lived perfectly fine as a state before 1991. We were the fastest growing state in the entire nation. And you know why? Because we didn't have a state income tax.
Thank you. Our next question is from Chris, and it goes to Mr. Lamont.
Mr. Lamont, after years in the Big East, UConn now has to subsidize its athletic department to the tune of nearly $30 million a year. That's the third highest amount out of all Division I athletic programs. The football program alone spends $8 million more than it brings in each year. What will you do to try to get the university into a premier conference and get those finances under control?
I'd love to see in the ACC. I think this is a big league place, and we ought to be playing with the big league teams everywhere we go. This is an amazing university, and I support the sports program you have here. I love the energy and passion that it brings. I love the pride that it brings to the state of Connecticut. Watching the women's basketball team win, that is so important to Connecticut, so important to who we are, and it sends a message wherever we can go. Look, I love this university. We cannot afford to cut back on UConn. This is our premier university. It's a top 25 public university, and we get tens of thousands of more applications, top 10% people. This means so much to this future. And I want each and every one of you here who come to Connecticut, come to UConn, many of you come from out of state. 10% of the freshman class is Chinese, Susan told me today. That's remarkable. Get some of those folks to stay here as well. Make sure that this is a state that they can call home, and make sure they can bring some business and bring some opportunities and bring some investments here. So look, that's one of the reasons where you can't cut $10 billion out of a budget that's already in deficit. That would be devastating to UConn. That would be devastating to our educational opportunities. Connecticut doesn't have oil, it doesn't have natural gas. We've always had the best trained, most productive, best educated workforce in the world. That's why we have advanced manufacturing here. That's why we have fintech. That's why we have insurance. And I'm going to do everything I can to make sure we have the same quality workforce going forward. Make sure each and every one of you know that there's going to be an amazing job waiting for you as soon as you graduate. And if you get to go to a couple of basketball games along the way and enjoy yourself, God bless you.
Mr. Gribble, you have 2 minutes. What would you do to try to get the university into a premier conference and get the finances of UConn under control?
Two things. I do want to make one other correction. Bob is the independent party endorsed candidate. 27,000 registered voters of the independent party, most of whom don't even know they're registered with the independent party. 63 showed up to vote. Bob beat me 40-14. So just I want to keep in context when we say we're an independent party candidate. On the conference, Dennis, I've had the privilege and the pleasure of playing and coaching at the intercollegiate level when I was a lot younger. I'm very concerned about that we've lost our way with interscholastic athletics. Over the last 30 years, this has been about money, and I understand the idea of getting into a conference. But the idea that taxpayers are going to subsidize a big-time athletic program, I have to tell you, I'm from Missouri. The idea that we have to have everything, I think there'd be a lot of people who wish we never left the Big East. If those Big East rivalries were still here in basketball, you'd be putting fannies in the seats in the XL Center. You wouldn't have the travel budget that you have to go to Tulsa or other places in the AAC. And by the way, that's not a lot better in the ACC, given the fact that you've got to go down to Florida. We're putting a lot of the so-called minor sports of volleyball and soccer and baseball, I think, in a very precarious position, in the sense that all the travel time that those teams have to go. I know Jimmy Pender's here fairly well. I've got a lot of respect for him. I think he's one of the best coaches in the country. But the challenge that he faces in that when you have to squeeze all those games into about a 6-week period, puts a lot of strain on the student athlete. So I think there's a real question before I answer whether we get them into a big-time conference. Is that really what we want to do? I know that people start probably throwing tomatoes at me here, but the fact is, this is about students getting an education. And I'd say MIT, that's been a Division III school all of its life, pretty good place to put a marker against.
Mr. Gribble, thank you. Mr. Stefanowski, you have 2 minutes. What would you do to try to get the university into a premier conference and rein in the finances?
So education's critical. I mean, you should all be proud of this school. It's a terrific institution. It's a hallmark of Connecticut. My dad and mom, they didn't go to college. My dad worked at the Southern New England Telephone Company for 30 years. He was ran the scoreboard at the Yale Bowl for about 40 years, where I was an usher. I think I may have showed Ned to his seat one day for a 25-cent tip. But education's important. They valued education. I had one sister who went to Yale, one who went to Quinnipiac, one who went to Albertus Magnus, one who went to UConn, and I went to Fairfield. We need to continue to support education in the state of Connecticut. But it also needs to be affordable. If my stats are correct, we had 37,000 applications for 5,300 spots at UConn. It shows how great the university is. It shows what you've done for its reputation. It shows what a great education you have. But we have to keep education affordable. We need to look at a holistic approach. We need to look at education across the state. Some kids don't need a college education. For many kids, it's terrific. But when I go to small and mid-sized businesses around this state, they are dying for basic machine tools, engineering, computer graphics. We need to do more with our trade schools. We need to provide the skill sets that companies want. So we need to provide a menu of choices for people. Affordable education at the college level, continue to support it. We need to be disciplined around our spending at the college level. The costs in this state are out of control. Every university needs to be more diligent about how much they spend, and we need to use those savings to keep tuition costs down. so kids can afford to go. But education be a #1 priority, and I'm going to go back to it again. The best way to pay for education is to get this economy moving. My economic plan is going to get the economy moving. He's going to continue Dan Malloy, and the economy is not going to grow under a Lamont administration. It's just not.
Thank you, Mr. Stefanowski. Mr. Lamont, you have 1 minute to rebut.
Well, maybe Bob, Oz, and I, we can go to a football game sometime when this is all over and learn to relax. I can just tell you that if education is priority for you, and you're inheriting a $2.5 billion deficit, and you're going to cut another $11 billion out of the budget, at some point, the numbers just don't add up. I heard that from every single of your Republican candidates. They said it's a fake promise. They said the numbers don't add up. It's fantasy land. You need somebody who's going to tell you the truth. And I'm going to tell you, students, that I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that this university is affordable and CCSU is affordable, our community colleges are affordable. I'm going to work with the business community to make them, hopefully they'll pay for some more of our training expenses like Pratt & Whitney does right now for folks graduating with some of the skills they need. That's going to be a priority for me, to make sure education is affordable for each and every one of you, and you are trained for the jobs that are out there.
Thank you very much. It is now time for our rapid fire segment. Quick questions, short answers, perhaps even yes or no or one-word answers. The first question goes to Mr. Griebel. What's the biggest example of...
Say it again?
First question to you.
Yes.
You're all going to have to answer it, though. What's the biggest example of government waste in Connecticut? In your judgment.
I would say the lack of privatization of certain services like the ECD.
Mr. Stefanowski.
Do I have an hour to answer that question, or is this rapid fire?
Rapid fire.
Listen, the amount of money we spend on transportation for the lack of results, I would have to vote for that.
Mr. Lamont.
Healthcare costs, especially big pharma.
Emily.
Should Brett Kavanaugh be approved for the Supreme Court?
Mr. Stefanowski.
I'm going to pass on that. That's a federal issue.
Mr. Lamont.
I don't think he should be approved. And by the way, governors appoint Supreme Court justices here in the state. And you want to know where we stand on these issues. You want to know where we stand.
Mr. Griebel.
I think the women who've come forward have to be heard. I also think Judge Kavanaugh deserves a fair hearing.
Chris, for Mr. Lamont.
Is there a state agency or department we could live without or fold into another?
First thing you got to do is take all the back offices from all these different and merge them into one central thing. We have too many departments, too many divisions, too much redundancy.
Mr. Griebel.
I'll say DECD should be privatized.
Mr. Stefanowski.
The Department of Motor Vehicles, privatize it.
This question goes to Mr. Griebel. How would you grade President Trump in a letter grade, his performance?
On across the board, Dennis, and this is...
Just over the...
Yeah, over the, I'd say...
One grade.
D+.
D+. Mr. Stefanowski.
I don't have a lot of the tweets, Dennis, but is economic policy lowering taxes? We could use some of that in Connecticut.
So A, B, C, D?
I'm not going to give a grade. I like his economic
policy. Well, you gave him
policy.
A before. I just want to know if he still gets that.
I like his economic policy, Dennis.
Mr. Lamont.
He does not reflect Connecticut values one iota. I think he's wrong. I give him an F.
Please. Mr. Emily, next question for Mr. Lamont first.
And what grade would you give Governor Malloy?
When it comes to solving the fiscal crisis, an F.
Mr. Griebel.
I would give Governor Malloy a C+.
Mr. Stefanowski.
You got to give him an F, and Ned Lamont's going to continue the economic policy.
Chris for Mr. Griebel.
Mr. Griebel, what's the biggest mistake Governor Malloy did in office?
Could you repeat that?
What's the biggest mistake Governor Malloy made in office? Mr. Griebel first.
Governor Malloy has not brought people together. It's been kind of the my way or the highway, and that would be the answer.
Mr. Stefanowski.
The two largest tax increases in the history of Connecticut that have driven down tax revenues because people leave.
He didn't push all the way to get this fiscal crisis solved in year one.
What's the best thing Governor Malloy did? Mr. Griebel.
Second chance program.
Mr. Stefanowski.
Certainly not second chance.
One good thing he did.
Oh, boy. Can we go to Ned and come back to me?
Mr. Lamont.
I think Oz is right on criminal justice reform, and I'd also add, after Sandy Hook, I thought he was heroic.
Emily, For Mrs. Stefanowski.
Would you support changing Connecticut law so a candidate could pick his or her running mate instead of being paired with the primary winner?
I think that might make sense, yes.
Mr. Lamont.
I like my running mate.
Mr. Griebel.
That's what we did. You didn't need the law changed.
Chris, for Mr. Lamont.
Mr. Lamont, should there be a bear hunt?
Say it again.
Should there be a bear hunt?
A bear hunt. I have very strong feelings about that, and I would say maybe.
Mr. Griebel.
Yes, you need it, yes.
Mr. Stefanowski.
Black bear or brown bear? No, that's fine. Yes.
Mr. Griebel, should we ban plastic bags in our state like some towns have done?
That should be a goal. I don't know what the economic implications are, but yes, that should be a goal, absolutely.
Plastic straws?
Yes.
Mr. Stefanowski, should we ban plastic bags, plastic straws?
No.
Mr. Lamont.
Yes, over a period of time.
Emily, for Mr. Stefanowski.
Do you think the car tax is fair?
Well, Nanette's putting another one on at the state level. I would leave the car tax up to the different municipalities. It should not be mandated at the state level like Ned wants to do.
Is it fair or unfair, though, in your view?
Depends on the town. It's a different rate.
Mr. Lamont.
I think it's unfair. The idea that a BMW in Madison costs less to insure than a Prius in Bridgeport, it's unfair.
Mr. Griebel.
I think it's fair because I don't know how else you're going to replace the revenue.
Mr.
Lamont, if marijuana is legalized in our state, what should the legal age to smoke it be?
What's the average age in here?
Yeah, what's your average age? What's the break point, guys? 18. Same as alcohol.
Same as alcohol.
Mr. Stefanowski.
I'm okay with it for medicinal purpose, but I'm not in favor of legalizing it right now.
Emily.
Is East Windsor the best location for the third casino?
Mr. Griebel.
Until we resolve the matter with the two tribes, I don't think any place is good for a next casino.
Mr. Stefanowski.
Yeah, we have to look at the entire state and come up with a policy that's comprehensive.
Mr. Lamont.
For the first time in history, you'll hear me say, I agree with Bob.
This question goes to Mr. Stefanowski first. Should we have armed guards in schools?
I don't think it should be teachers. I think it should be up to each town, but I think unfortunately we're at the place where certain school districts should consider it. It should be up to the town. It should be a trained retired state trooper or someone that knows what they're doing.
Mr. Lamont.
I'll leave it up to the school district.
Same thing.
Chris, your next question, go to Mr. Griebel first.
Mr. Griebel, should Governor Malloy hire the next president of Yukon, or should that decision be made by the next governor?
I think it has to be made by the next governor.
Mr. Stefanowski.
Next governor.
Mr. Lamont.
Yeah, I should make that decision.
Emily.
Has the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, benefited Connecticut residents?
Mr. Stefanowski, I'll let you start.
No.
Mr. Lamont.
Absolutely, especially when it comes to pre-existing conditions.
Mr. Griebel.
Like parts of it have and parts of it haven't, like a lot of other things.
Nearly 40 states have a parental consent abortion law for children under the age of 18. A girl does not have to get her parents' permission to have an abortion in this state. Do you agree with that, or should it change? Mr. Griebel.
Leave it as it is.
Mr. Stefanowski.
Unless there's extraordinary circumstances, I think there should be notification.
Mr. Lamont.
There's always an extraordinary circumstance, no new law.
Emily, for Mr. Stefanowski.
There's talk of naming a school in Bridgeport after Barack Obama. Should a school or something else be named after George W. Bush, the only president to be born in Connecticut?
That's up to the schools.
Mr. Lamont.
Yeah, that was Harding High School that they were going to change the name. I think they should name something after George W. Bush.
I think it's up to the local school district.
It's one of the busiest stretches of road in Connecticut, and it's crumbling. Which of the three plans being talked about do you support for rebuilding the Etna Viaduct and I-84 in Hartford? You'll have to weigh in on this if you're governor. A tunnel, rebuild it the way it is, or part tunnel, part above ground? Mr. Lamont.
I like Larson thinking big on it, but my hunch is part tunnel, part above ground.
Mr. Griebel.
I would go with the plan of the submerged plan, not the tunnel, but the submerged plan in terms of lowering it.
Mr. Stefanowski.
We need to look at the most cost-efficient way and find a way to finance it before we make that decision.
All right. Chris?
Mr. Lamont, should Tesla be allowed to sell cars in Connecticut without having to open a dealership?
Yes.
Mr. Stefanowski.
I think there's value to dealerships, that local presence. I would say not.
Mr. Griebel.
No.
It's time now for our closing arguments, closing statements. You have 1 minute to make them. And Mr. Griebel, you won the hat toss, or whatever you want to call it earlier today, so you get to go first, please. 1 minute.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here, and want to emphasize that what Monty Frank and I offer you as voters today, for maybe the first time in the history of Connecticut, a real choice. If we continue for the next 4 years under a Republican or a Democratic administration, we will continue to have no net job growth, higher taxes, and constant bickering over who's right and who's wrong, whose dogma is superior over someone else's dogma. It is time for you as voters to take the state of Connecticut back from the two-party system and elect leadership in Monty Frank and me that will focus on you, the Connecticut taxpayer, you, the Connecticut resident, you, the Connecticut student, and you, the Connecticut employer, and not on re-election after re-election. It is time for a change. Monty Frank and I offer you a real choice on November 6th. On November 6th, vote Oz Griebel and Monty Frank.
Thank you, Mr. Griebel. Mr. Stefanowski, you have 1 minute.
So thank you, everyone, for listening tonight. You know, elections are really important. And you have to make a choice about differences in personality, difference in substance, and difference in policy. So you all need to make a decision as to which candidate has the empathy, the executive presence, the honesty, and the toughness to turn around a state that is essentially bankrupt right now. But when it comes to policy, your choice is crystal clear. If you want the status quo, it's Ned Lamont. If you want higher taxes, if you want bigger government, if you want another 4 years of Dan Malloy, Ned Lamont is your guy. I've been consistent on this for a year. I will bring change. I will lower taxes. I will not let tolls go up. I will get this economy moving. We will use the increased tax revenues to fund education, to fix our roads and bridges, to invest in health care. I will be the agent of change that Connecticut needs. Ned Lamont will not. Thank you very much for listening tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Stefanowski. Please hold your applause, hold your applause. Mr. Lamont, you have 1 minute, please. Please hold your applause.
You want a governor who will be absolutely fearless when it comes to going up to Hartford and shaking up that status quo. And that's what I've done my whole life. You know, business, I took on the biggest old cable guys around, big old ossified companies, the likes of which Bob used to work for. We beat them. We beat them by delivering better service at less cost. And you need some of that entrepreneurial zip up in Hartford, and that's what I mean to do. You also need a governor who's willing to stand up and do what's right. And I think you've known that from the 12 years that we've gotten to know each other. 12 years ago, when I took on a senior member of my own party because I thought he was wrong, I didn't endear myself to the party brass, but I stood up. And I stood up and challenged Dan Malloy as well, and I'm going to stand up every day and do what I think is right. And when it comes to temperament, you want somebody who treats people with respect, works with labor, works with business, Republicans and Democrats. We're going to work together. We're going to solve this together because we're Connecticut.
Thank you, Mr. Lamont. I want to thank all of the candidates. And now you can cheer. I'd also like to thank our panelists, Emily Munson and Chris Hanna. Thank you to the University of Connecticut for hosting us tonight. And a reminder, tomorrow at this time, 7 o'clock on our digital platforms on WFSB, we will have a debate between the running mates. See you tomorrow. Good night.